The failure of Operation Market Garden in September 1944 left the British in control of a salient of Dutch territory up to the city of Nijmegen and just beyond. As shown in a previous video, the Germans tried to eliminate this bulge in their line, laying close as it did to the German main Western Front defences, but failed. The British kept their foothold north of the River Vaal, and importantly, the Great Nijmegen Road Bridge, which had been captured intact during Operation Market Garden. The Germans did, however, manage to successfully destroy the Nijmegen Railway Bridge, using German naval frogmen on the 28th of September 1944. The Nijmegen Road Bridge provided a supply node for a renewed offensive from Nijmegen towards Germany. In particular, the British held an island of territory created by land flooding between Nijmegen and Arnhem. The Germans concentrated on removing this island, but when German paratroopers made a serious attack on the 4th of December 1944, they were smartly beaten back by the British 49th Infantry Division with heavy losses. In preparation for Field Marshal Montgomery's renewed push to the Rhine, he ordered that the British Second Army was to clear the remaining pocket of German resistance west of the River Maas, known as the Meuse in Belgium, particularly in the area around the town of Venlo. This was done by early December. However, all plans were soon put on hold when the Germans launched their surprise Ardennes offensive on the 16th of December, resulting in Montgomery shifting the British 30 Corps south to assist the Americans in containing the German thrust towards the River Meuse in Belgium. The Canadians and British now prepared for a second German offensive in their sector, which was expected. However, it never happened. But Generaloberst Kurt Student, commanding Army Group H, had made preparations for such a supporting operation, if the Ardennes offensive had made good progress. In the event, the Ardennes thrust ended up behind schedule and was eventually stopped dead by US and British forces at the River Meuse, so Student never launched his supporting offensive. But Student had nonetheless gathered a considerable force in the Netherlands to do so, consisting of 3 infantry divisions, 2 parachute divisions, and 150 tanks and other armoured vehicles to attack across the Meuse River. An entire parachute battalion was supposed to have been dropped on British artillery positions before the main offensive began. The objective for this attack was exactly the same as the Ardennes operation: Antwerp, the Allied main supply base in Belgium. It is surprising this attack wasn't made, as it could very well have proved difficult for the overstretched Allies to contain. However, the German paratroopers were soon to fight a forgotten but very bitter struggle on the Maas River in the Netherlands. In a heavily waterlogged area northeast of Breda, a subsidiary channel of the Maas forms along the river's south shore a long island called Kapelsche. The British and Canadian front line was now at the Maas River, except in one place, where the Germans had a strong position on the Allied side of the line. That was, of course, the small island in the river called Kapelsche, which Student maintained by replacing the troops holding it with a fresh company every 3 or 4 days. The Allies were determined that this annoying German foothold in Allied territory be eliminated. The problem was that the German paratroopers holding the island had dug themselves in very thoroughly, and the approaches to it were open, snow-covered killing grounds. In the last days of December 1944, the Polish 1st Armoured Division, under Canadian command, attacked but were repulsed. The Poles tried again in January 1945, incurring 120 casualties in the process, but were once again forced back. Like the German paratroopers at Monte Cassino in Italy, their comrades at Kapelsche were seemingly immovable. The position had to be taken to restore local morale, deny the Germans a prime location for observing Allied movements. It also allowed the Germans to control artillery fire and mount patrols into the Allied positions south of the Maas River. The Poles had under their command No. 47 Commando Royal Marines, and on the 13th of January the Marines advanced across the flat, snow-covered terrain. This was Operation Horse. German mortar fire was intense. The 47 commander was forced back with 49 casualties. It was obvious that the island was very stubbornly held, and the Royal Marines force was too small, and so was withdrawn. It was decided to turn the problem over to the Canadians, the Canadian 4th Armoured Division to be precise. This time a much bigger attack was planned, codenamed Elephant. The 4th Armoured Division detailed Brigadier J.C. Jefferson's 10th Armoured Brigade to assault the island. Facing them were elements of Generalleutnant Hermann Plocker's 6th Fallschirmjäger Division, consisting of a reinforced company dug in on the island, with observation posts linked to artillery batteries, self-propelled guns and mortar units on the mainland north of the Maas. The island itself is very small, 5 miles long and 1 mile wide at its widest point, and has dikes up to 20 feet high, protecting its southern side from the river's strong currents. Operation Elephant involved an assault by 2 infantry battalions, 1 tank regiment, and considerable artillery support, including some 300 guns. This time there would be no preparatory bombardment before the assault, which merely alerted the German defenders. Instead, the Canadians would attack in daylight through a carefully laid smokescreen. Flamethrower Bren gun carriers, known as Wasps, would also be used to support this assault. 2 infantry companies would attack from the east and 1 from the west, moving simultaneously towards the objective, the harbour. A bridge was put together by Canadian Royal Engineers, nicknamed the Mad Whore's Dream, ready to be hauled into place at the start of the offensive in the eastern end of the island, to allow tanks to go over. In the meantime, the Germans had reinforced the garrison to 150 men from Oberst Martin Vetter's 13th Parachute Regiment. Student had made it clear to General Plocher that he must hold the island at all costs. The paratroopers took him at his word. At 07:15 on the 26th of January 1945, the Canadian smokescreen began to be laid. 10 minutes later, C Company, the Lincoln and Welland Regiment, crossed the bridge, supported by 4 Wasp flamethrower vehicles. They linked up with A Company 1.5 miles east, this unit having crossed the icy waters in Buffalo armoured infantry carriers. A canoe party had also crossed but come under intense German fire in the harbour, losing several canoes. Of 60 men on this particular mission, only 15 made it halfway to the objective. In the meantime, A Company reached its objective, a heavily fortified house codenamed Grapes, but heavy German fire drove them back. At 09:45, A Company halted and dug in under heavy enemy fire. Close to their objective, another heavily fortified house codenamed Raspberry. The German paratroopers counterattacked, driving A Company all the way back to C Company's positions, which were behind it, C Company in the process losing all of its officers. At 11:30, the attack was aborted, and both companies were withdrawn from the island. In the west, B Company, Lincoln and Welland Regiment, crossed in buffaloes towards Raspberry, but was stopped again by heavy German fire. At 1200 hours, this attack had failed. Brigadier Jefferson ordered the Lincoln and Welland Regiment to try again from the west, and the fresh Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders of Canada from the east, with tank support. The bridge in the east could take tanks, but no bridge existed in the west, so the heavy vehicles would have to be rafted over. In the east, 2 Stuart light tanks crossed the Mad Whore's Dream, but could not negotiate the tall dike bank on the island. The Argylls were by now under heavy mortar fire at the eastern end of the island. In the west, German patrols and a snowstorm delayed the construction of the tank raft. On the 27th of January, attacks from both ends of the island were defeated by German mortars, machine gun and artillery fire. Armour now proved the only possible way to break the stalemate. However, Canadian artillery fire was also causing problems for the Germans, slowing down their ability to reinforce the island. They only managed to move over parts of the Pioneer and anti-tank platoon of the 7th Fallschirmjäger Regiment. At the eastern end of the island, 2 Sherman tanks crossed the bridge. Then, the much-anticipated raft in the west began operations, and 3 Shermans were landed there. The 28th of January, the temperature suddenly rose, thawing out the island, which turned into a morass of mud. In the west, where 3 of the Shermans had landed, one became bogged down, blocking the tank behind it, while the leading Sherman supported the infantry thrust towards Raspberry, but the German fire stopped the infantry. In the east, 4 tanks moved towards objective Grapes, but the infantry again was stopped by ferocious German mortar and machine gun fire. By 1400 hours, the Canadian attacks had stopped. One victory was a Sherman managing to shell a 25-man German platoon, killing 17 paratroopers and wounding 5. This caused German fire to slacken, and the Argylls managed to capture Grapes, followed by the Lincoln and Welland Regiment capturing Raspberry. Although Grapes and Raspberry were in Canadian hands, plenty of German paratroopers remained in the tunnels and bunkers beneath the houses. That night, they counterattacked and recaptured both buildings. On the morning of the 29th of January 1945, German mortar fire increased in ferocity. Canadian artillery fire replied with 14,000 shells fired from its 25-pounder guns. At 0700, the Canadian infantry once more assaulted Grapes and Raspberry. The mud made movement a big problem. Tanks were bogged down all over the place. At 12:45, the eastern prong of the attack, supported by 2 tanks, saw the Argylls retake Grapes, but Raspberry remained in German hands. By now the Germans were down to only 70 men, including 20 wounded. They were holding positions around Raspberry and on the west side of the harbour. On the 30th of January, as dawn broke, 2 Sherman tanks opened up on Raspberry with their guns. However, it wasn't until 11:15 that the infantry attacked and got absolutely nowhere once again as they were mowed down by machine gun fire and mortars. The Canadians were now only 100 yards from objective Raspberry. They tried again at 1500 hours but were repulsed. At 15:30, the Germans allowed the Canadians to collect their wounded under a flag of truce. Then, with 2 more Shermans in support, the Canadian infantry tried for a 3rd time that day. 4 Sherman tanks battered the German positions. The Argylls stormed Raspberry at bayonet point. However, any further advance was stopped by German paratroopers. On the eastern side of the island, a German Panzerfaust team managed to knock out one of the Shermans. At 0800 on the 31st of January, the Argylls linked up with the Lincoln and Welland Regiment. In the meantime, the Germans had quietly evacuated the island. German casualties for Operation Elephant were 64 killed and wounded and 34 taken prisoner. The Canadians suffered 133 killed and wounded. The assaults by the Poles and Royal Marines had cost 231 killed and wounded. In total, the Allies suffered 364 men killed and wounded trying to capture the tiny Kapelsche Veer. It demonstrated once again what formidable and stubborn fighters German paratroopers could be, and demonstrated also that in the last year of the war, German soldiers could fight very well and effectively. Many thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share. Also visit my audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon. Details in the description box below.